that has been a theory here in this area of the country for a long time, that there was two shooters. And obviously there were two different weapons used. So, I mean, it's a theory that can be put out there, and I think the jury is going to have to debate that.
Welcome to the global phenomenon, Surviving the Survivor, where we're all just trying to survive in a rough world.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime, and today is no different. It is almost the end of week 4 of the Alex Murdaugh trial. Of course, he is the embattled former South Carolina attorney charged with killing both his wife, Maggie, and his son, Paul. And that, my friends, is just a fraction of the story. Best guest here to break it all down. You've seen him once before, and now you're seeing him again. He is a veteran South Carolina criminal defense attorney and a well-known TV personality. Jack Swerling is an active South Carolina criminal attorney, a litigator, a writer, a lecturer. He's been doing it since 1973, and I just found out he is from the boogie down Bronx, just like my own father. And despite appearances, he's a tall man that once played basketball. Also named a South Carolina super lawyer, a top 10 in criminal defense. And you might find this interesting. Jack Swerling was a partner in the law firm of Swerling, Harpootlian and McCulloch. And notice whose name came first in that list. Jack Swerling and then Dick Harpootlian. So we can ask him about that as well. Angenette Levy, who's got that beautiful backdrop. I thought that was a green screen, but I found out it's not. She's a correspondent and host for the Law&Crime Network. She's covered a number of high-profile criminal cases in both state and federal courts throughout her career, including the trials of Steven Avery, Brooke, Skylar, Richardson, and most recently the trials of Kyle Rittenhouse and former disgraced Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. And last but certainly not least, famed Tallahassee defense attorney R. Timothy Jansen. He is a partner in the firm that bears his name, Jansen and Davis. He's handled all kinds of complex civil, administrative, and criminal litigation and spent 5 years as a federal prosecutor and was all over the news just this week. He helped break the story about Congressman Matt Gaetz not being charged. A couple of quick points. Please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We are at Podcast STS. Please support us at Patreon. And as my 8 and 7-year-old daughters say, please hit that subscribe button and the like button. It helps get the algorithm chugging. So, Jack Swerling, to you first. Dick Harpootlian is your old friend. It's almost time for him to take center stage as the state is wrapping up their business. What are you expecting from your old pal, who's still a pal, and from this defense strategy?
Well, I think they're gonna try and finish up strong. The state, according to what I've been hearing, as far as the the media talking heads like us, they are disappointed in the state's case. They think they're finishing on a flat line and not doing very well at the end, not bringing it all together. And I think Harpootlian will take advantage of that. I think he'll come out very strong on Monday. They've got a number of witnesses that I know that are holding back experts, and he'll attack the state's case pretty good. He's a former prosecutor himself, well over 20 years, and he's been a defense lawyer for some 20 years now. So I think he'll go hard at it and try and create reasonable doubt, which at this point, a lot of people think there already is a lot of reasonable doubt.
And Jack, last time we had you on, you had just had lunch with Mr. Harpootlian. Any recent lunches and anything that you want to break on Surviving the Survivor so we go viral, and then I can thank you afterwards?
Yeah, we had lunch together on Sunday, this past Sunday. He's been coming back into Columbia on the weekends. So we had lunch last Sunday and just kind of, rapped about what's going on down in Walterboro and what the future holds. He pretty much feels they are where he thought they would be at this point. So there's been no surprises. There's been a lot of information coming out today. They went into this roadside shooting of Alex Murdaugh. The judge let that in because he said there was a door opening by some of the questions that were asked on cross. So that got pretty interesting. Another collateral issue, though. Certainly, they've been able to prove that Murdaugh's a liar. He's a thief. Stole from his law firm, stole from his clients. The question is, have they proven that he's a murderer, especially of his wife and his son?
And Angenette, that is the $64,000 question here. Have they done that? A lot of people say that they have not. That the waters have really just been muddied with multiple trials in one. Obviously, as Jack just alluded to, Thursday testimony and witnesses were brought in about this roadside shooting. We've heard all about the financial fraud. You're covering the case. What is your impression of how the jury, from your reportage, is absorbing all this?
Tossing to me?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear you say my name. I apologize. I had a little guy come in here and interrupt. So sorry about that, guys. I think that, when I've been in the courtroom, there have been times where they did look a little bored. One of my colleagues, Gigi, told me today that she thought they seemed bored during the roadside shooting testimony and the interview conducted, or the Alex Murdaugh interview. It was a phone interview that Agent Kelly conducted from SLED of Alex Murdaugh with both Jim Griffin and Dick Harpootlian on the phone. It seems like they're probably more engaged, and they have been more engaged when there's something for them to see. With Dr. Kinsey was actually showing them things. So some of the testimony, I think, has been kind of dry and confusing. I thought the way the DNA testimony was presented the other day, I've never seen DNA testimony presented in that fashion. I don't know what the prosecution was thinking with the way that was presented. But today it was more interesting because they had something to look at, something to tell them how this could have happened. It doesn't mean they proved Alex Murdaugh was the one that did it, but they certainly, with the reconstruction, it was something visual, something you could think about.
And Tim, to you, you've been on both sides of the legal aisle, prosecuting as well as defense. First off, did the state, and they're about to wrap the case, did they fail to succeed at their job, do you think?
They may have tried to overtry their case. They have some really good pieces of evidence that clearly show that Alex lied, that he was there, that the defense, of course, wants you to forget about. They want you to get away from all that. The video of him cutting down that tree, or the tree falling, like at 7:56 in that clothing, and then his voice, apparently by everybody that identified him at the kennel, and then where'd that clothing go? They later see him that night in sneakers and tennis shoes, and he says he touched the body, turned it over, but there was no blood on him. Factually, it's impossible with the way they described the scene that anybody that would have turned over a body or touched the body would have gotten some blood. They're trying to overtry the case. I thought Kinsey was a great witness. I think he's got a lot of expertise. I think they need to get it simple. A prosecution doesn't have to prove motive. And they brought in all this collateral stuff for motive, and it's given the defense a lot of stuff to say that's got nothing to do with this case. And he's going to try to make it weak, saying they can't prove motive. How can they prove murder? You don't have to prove motive.
And Jack, a lot of people have said it is prosecutorial overkill. How prosecutors operate. If you were trying this case, what would you have done differently? I mean, overall, I know there's a lot of minutiae and details I'm sure you would have done differently, but from overall bird's eye view, how would you have tried this case if you were the state?
Well, I mean, I agree with what Tim said. I think they need to keep it more simple than they've made it. They've made it very complex at this point, and they've given the defense a lot of opportunities to create reasonable doubt. The one thing that the defense is going to have a difficult time getting over is the timeline. He's at the kennels at 8:45. The death or the shooting took place shortly thereafter, within a few minutes. There's a call. Supposedly he's at his mother's house at 9. There's a phone call at 10. A lot of these things just don't work. And so if I were the state, I probably would have kept it very simple as far as the timeline is concerned, because that's something that is probably going to have to draw the defendant to the witness stand to go ahead and testify in his own defense. And I think that could be problematic, as it is with putting any defendant up on the stand.
And
a lot of questions the state was not able to answer.
Yeah. Angenette, for a while we weren't sure what the answer was to this, but your colleague Gigi confirmed it, as well as others. And there is no note taking.
Right.
In some courtrooms it's allowed. So how difficult, we're both reporters, former reporter on my end, but it's an inordinate amount of material. We're finishing up week 4, going into week 5, and there's not really an end in sight at this point. How difficult do you think this is on the jurors to sort of keep track of everything? Literally mentally, till they get into deliberations.
I think it is pretty difficult, especially, with some of the testimony where they haven't had anything visual to aid them in, absorbing the information. And, it's funny because I was a juror one time on a homicide case like 20 some odd years ago, and it was supposed to last like 4 days. It ended up lasting 3 weeks. It was, nothing on this scale, though. It was just like this, maybe gang kind of thing. It was sad. But the judge said, a lot of judges let the jurors take notes. I don't believe in that. I want you to just sit and pay attention. I don't want you focusing on note taking. I want you to just listen and hear all of it. However, this trial has so much information that I would think that it would be possibly very difficult. And when the judge sends them back into the jury room to deliberate, he's going to tell them to, rely on their recollections. And, I probably shouldn't be like quoting my memory about jury instructions with, lawyers here, but that's basically what they tell them, when they're supposed to be deliberating, rely on their, memory of, or the recollection of the testimony, and they can ask for a readback if they need it. So I think it's been a lot for them to absorb without having to take notes.
Tim, you're obviously a very seasoned defense attorney. You've had high profile cases. Knowing what you know about this case, how would you proceed if you're Dick Harpootlian going into next week when the defense makes its case?
Well, Jack may not agree with me, but he might. All that trials are is a performance. It's like a play. That's really what it is. And if you think both sides wanted to be fair to each other, you're kidding yourself. So if you're doing a play, you want to give your best performance. I think that Dick knows where his strengths are. I think Dick knows where the state's weaknesses are. He's going to hit those as much as possible. He's going to draw those out as much as possible. He's going to hope to ignore the bad parts of his case and focus and hope that he gets 1, 2 jurors. He may identify which jurors he can tell is resonant to their view. You can usually tell that right away. Asking questions, you can see jurors nodding their heads. You know who's with you. You know who's against you. The timeline kills him. It's a terrible timeline for him. You're talking, 3 to 5 minutes that somebody else came there on that property, shot and killed these people, got away, didn't leave anything. When he
with the family guns.
As a lawyer, and sometimes lawyers always think they're smarter than everyone else, but to give those interviews, even with his lawyers present, was terrible, absolutely horrible. And I would never have my client give an interview like that, because it's coming back to haunt him. He says, I wasn't at the kennels multiple times. And now, with all Snapchat, we have his voice.
Jack, do you agree with Tim?
As far as giving the interview?
Yes. And let's start there.
Well, I don't know what the strategy was at that time for them to go ahead and give the interview. I would suspect that because Murdaugh is a lawyer himself, that he insisted on that. I don't believe that that was a decision that the defense lawyers made for him. I think that that was something he raised. And, as Tim knows and everybody knows that, lawyers as defendants are very difficult clients. They want to control the flow. They want to control the strategy. And this is not a neophyte. I mean, he's been an experienced trial lawyer for many years, mostly in the civil venue, but also has done some criminal cases. He was a part-time solicitor, which we call our district attorney solicitors here. And his family has a legacy in that area. His father, who I knew and tried cases with, his grandfather, who I knew and tried cases with,
Wow.
are legends in South Carolina. So I believe that the defendant in this case himself made a lot of poor decisions.
And Jack, we've talked about this and posed the question many times. Maybe you can answer it definitively since you've got the inside track with Dick Harpootlian. Is there any chance he will allow Alex Murdaugh to take the stand next week?
Well, I think that's going to be the most difficult decision that has to be made in this case and also in many cases. And in fact, in most cases, because you really can't make that decision until the state rests its case. And you have to take a look and see what they haven't proven. And by putting your client up, are you going to help them prove an issue that is still open? And I think with Murdaugh, the way he has rambled and he's lied and he's gone in a number of different directions here, I think he's a dangerous witness for himself. I don't know what Dick is going to advise him to do, or Jim Griffin. I know that they would probably like to keep him off the stand. But the problem is, can anybody explain the timeline, where he is, what happened to the clothes, what happened to the guns, what happened, between that trip to his mother's house that evening and returning, and what happened about the dinner? He may be the only person that can answer those questions. But the problem for him now is the jury he has no credibility at all. He's lied about everything.
And Angenette, to that point, we had Kim Varner on, who's also a very well-known veteran criminal defense attorney out of South Carolina. He actually compared Alex Murdaugh to Bill Clinton, which I thought was an interesting analogy to make.
Oh my!
In terms of because he knows him personally and said, he's a charming guy, he's charismatic. Do you have a sense of how the jury is reading him? Do you have any sense at all, or how the courtroom is reading Alex Murdaugh? Because you see him at times shaking hands, and he was sort of a bigger than life personality in those parts of South Carolina. But any sense at all of how the jury might be reading him at this point?
It's hard. I think they look over at him sometimes, and sometimes you see actual tears and coming out of his eyes. Sometimes I feel like he's just looking upset and there aren't any tears. So, I don't think they like him. I mean, he's obviously, how can you watch Tony Satterfield get up on the stand and testify and think, oh, I really like Alex Murdaugh? I don't think they like him. I think they think he's a bad guy. Does that mean that they will think that he's a murderer? I don't know, but I don't think they like him. I mean, I don't think that they, look at him as somebody that they have a lot of sympathy for. But I don't know. But part of me, and I don't know if you guys think this, part of me thought the roadside shooting stuff, he did lie about that, obviously, but then he later came clean. So I didn't know maybe if that sort of helps him at all, because then he kind of fessed up. But the state is saying he only fessed up when he was caught in a lie. So I don't know how you guys feel about that today, how that cut for him.
Yeah. And happy to have you guys respond to that. But Jack, I was just going to jump in and ask you, one of the things that Dick Harpootlian and the defense did yesterday was also point out some of the problems with the sled investigation, how, no one really went to search the house. No one went to Alex Murdaugh's mother's home. And then this sled agent, the lead investigator, David Owen, got caught by defense attorneys and recalling a statement that they found buckshots and bird shots when that turned out to not be true. That Tim laughed there, and I'll find out why in a minute. But Jack, is Dick making sled look, I don't want to say incompetent. That might be too strong a word, but like, as you know, they obviously had issues with their investigation here.
Well, he's trying to shoot holes in the charges here, and I think that they're being fairly successful and in creating reasonable doubt on some of these issues. The question is going to be whether or not it was a thorough investigation. The question is going to be whether or not they did everything they could have done. Did they omit things that they should have done? Is that going to raise a reasonable doubt? One of the big things that hit the state yesterday was the fact that they presented to the grand jury information from a crime scene investigator that there was blood spatter on his T-shirt. Well, it turned out later it was not blood, and that was devastating as far as I'm concerned to the state, because that's what brought the initial charges. And there's other evidence, and the timeline is going to be is compact, and somebody's going to have to explain that. But I think that I think the defense has done a really magnificent job in trying to create reasonable doubt. I know that they'll continue to do that, but I don't want to take anything away from the state. This is a massive case. I'm well into the 500, 600 exhibits. A lot of tentacles in this case going in a lot of different directions. And I think they've tried to bring it together, but as Tim said, and they may have over-tried the case trying to go into this motive thing with the financial crimes. That just leaves a whole lot of information for the defense to go after.
And Jack, how many exhibits are typically in an average case, would you say? You just mentioned 500 to 600. How much do you typically see?
I mean, I'd say my average case in something, a homicide is 200 to 250. Very rarely would it exceed that. This is just very unusual. You had a lot of law enforcement agencies participating in this case. A lot of different people at the crime scene, which in and of itself may have been a problem, because they did some things that they should have not done at the crime scene, and there's some things they should have done that they didn't do. So SLED is very professional. I've dealt with them for over 50 years. There's really good investigators there, but you get a good cross-examination by a really good trial lawyer like these guys are, and they're going to be able to pick it apart, and they are picking it apart.
So, Tim, back to you here. The state did call Dr. Kenneth Kinsey. He was an impressive witness. He's a chief deputy at the Orangeburg Sheriff's Office and a crime scene expert. And they started, question him. It was his opinion that Paul was standing in the middle of the feed room facing southwest when he was first shot. Paul's arms, he says, were not raised, that there were these bloody footprints, and goes on and said that the kill shot happened just outside the doorway. It gets a little graphic because there was hair and blood on the top of the door frame. There was also spatter on cans and medication on a shelf inside the door. What was the state doing with this witness, and what were they trying to accomplish?
Well, I'd like to go back to the last question you asked Jack. The thing about the crime scene, and they didn't do what they should have done. It's a double-edged sword for the defense, because if they say that they didn't do enough to prove he's guilty, then they can't come back and say they focused solely on Alec. At the time of the scene, the murders, I don't believe any judge would have given them a warrant to search the house, or because there wasn't enough evidence to prove his involvement. You got a man standing there with no blood on him, calls 911, his wife and kid are shot. They don't have enough evidence at that point to get a warrant. They could ask him, can we search your premises? He probably would have said no. Obviously, they brought in this guy at the end because they believe he's their most credible. He's not the other guys that maybe had some tainted testimony or their reports conflicted with others. They knew this guy would be able to stand up to Dick, and they wanted to end strong with him with his background. Now, Dick tried to get him to say maybe the shooter was short. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that. Maybe the shooter took a shot, fell to the ground, shot from the ground, and that made the angle. The expert, he didn't take the bait. He said, I can't tell you how he was shooting. I can tell you the angle the bullet came. And he held his ground, which was good, which makes an expert like that really hard. Because when experts admit they don't know an answer. And same with the police officer. If they don't know an answer, they tell you, I don't know. That's much harder than the guy who always has an answer, the police officer who always got an answer, because jurors know that that's not right and they're not being forthright. I don't know if they're going to finish with this witness, but he was a strong witness for him, for the state.
Angenette, to you, in your bio, you've obviously covered a lot of big trials, most recently Kyle Rittenhouse and Derek Chauvin. How does this compare in size and scope? Obviously, those are, very politically charged trials, I would say. But how does this compare in terms of its magnitude?
Well, I think in this, this is a different. There's more. Excuse me. There's more of an air of mystery in this trial because it is sort of a whodunit. Some will say it's not a whodunit. The state will say it's not a whodunit because they say Alex Murdaugh did it, but there are other possibilities. Those cases were much different. As far as magnitude goes, those were so politically charged. You're right that they were so divisive. This is just more, I think people are engaged in this because I think a lot of people can't wrap their minds around the possibility of somebody, even though they're wealthy and were wealthy, but really not, had a drug problem. Just this fact that you're saying this guy killed his wife and son, and then somehow cleaned it all up and called 911. And just the fact that he's from this family, they're a legal dynasty in the area. I think it's just more, it's not a divisive case politically. It's not a hot potato like that. But I think people are engaged and interested in it because they do probably have an opinion about it, but a lot of people just it's intriguing, I think, because this is something you don't see every day. Somebody with this fall from grace and the possibility that it could have been somebody else. Yes, the timeline is very tight. I agree 100%. And I don't know how they're going to explain that he's on the kennel video. He's clearly telling law enforcement, I wasn't down there before I came home or after supper or whatever. I think it's just there's a lot of intrigue. It's mysterious.
And Jack, back to you here. So Dick Harpootlian, the photo of the day is he and Kinsey looking, at the gun, the angle of the gun, crouched over, huddled up. We had tweets and emails coming into us at Surviving the Survivor saying Dick Harpootlian is going to claim that Paul Murdaugh shot and killed Maggie and then killed himself. Well, that's next to impossible. And Miss Dr. Kinsey basically came out today, said that would be absolutely impossible. But is there a good chance, in your estimation, that your old partner, Dick Harpootlian, is going to come out and espouse a two-shooter theory? And that is why he's playing up this low angle. Maybe a short person or Tattoo from Fantasy Island was there. I don't know. But someone is coming at him from a low angle here. And that's why he's making such a big deal of it ahead of the defense taking center stage.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't put it past Dick to go ahead and try and do that. He's very savvy. He's got a sharp mind and he's got a sharp tongue. And he's going to go ahead and do whatever he can to create a reasonable doubt. That has been a theory here in this area of the country for a long time, that there was two shooters. And obviously there were two different weapons used. So, I mean, it's a theory that can be put out there. And I think the jury is going to have to debate that. And they're going to have to come to a conclusion beyond a reasonable doubt that it was only one shooter, but one shooter used two different weapons. The other thing that's been a big thing around here now, and since the beginning, is would a father kill his son? He might kill his wife in the heat of passion. We all have had cases like that, where one spouse or another goes ahead and takes the other spouse's life because of arguments. And there's a sharp, small line between love and hate. But to go ahead and take his son and blow his head off with a shotgun, I think that's going a bridge too far.
Tim, would you be surprised to see a two-shooter theory presented next week by Dick Harpootlian?
I wouldn't be surprised. Dick is laying the groundwork for it. He had two different guns used in the shooting. He's going to show the angle that was too low. That Alec is so tall. There's no way he could have fired the gun at that angle. And you don't shoot a shotgun at that angle, normally. So I would think Dick is obviously going to see what traction he gets. He might have an expert that can say that. I doubt he would put it out there if he didn't have an expert that can say that's a reasonable possibility. I'm sure, and they're going to be a battle of the experts.
Big picture question here. I raised this yesterday and got a very articulate answer. I don't think I'm gonna be able to ask it again. But Tim mentioned, Jack, and I'll go to you on this first. That it's really like a play. You have to perform. How do you negotiate that concept? And Dick Harpootlian is a masterful performer, right? But how do you negotiate that with getting justice and the justice system as an attorney? Sometimes those two can collide because you're on the one hand playing a game, on the other hand it's justice and a person's life at stake here. How do you reconcile that as a defense attorney?
Well, I mean, it's an excellent question, and I think all defense lawyers would agree, I believe, that there has to be some kind of performance in the courtroom. You have to do something a little bit different than what other people do. You have to have a mark for yourself, and so you play with your best, whatever your best attribute is. I like to use my size and my voice when I'm in the courtroom. I like to move around. I believe that I can keep the jury's attention by coming in and out and talking to the jury. Dick is a very polished, experienced trial lawyer. He and I have tried cases together, and we've also tried cases against each other. We've known each other almost 60 years. He is an artful performer, and he will put that out there. And I think that his performance, though, is going to be dramatic. I think he will hit high points of drama, but he's also going to be taking into consideration what's best for his client, and he's going to bring together all the issues of reasonable doubt to try and get the jury to come back with a not guilty verdict. He's very effective.
And Tim, I'm curious your answer about reconciling, the whole dramatic part of this profession with actually getting justice for a client or being fair and honest. How do you reconcile it all?
Well, I think Angenette said it. Jurors get bored if they're just seeing something on a board. If they're looking and hearing numbers, hearing dates, they get bored. Same with cross-examination, direct examination, and evidence. If you can't keep their attention, if you can't, as a lawyer, let them know subtly this is important, this is a key point that we're making, you need to know, they'll pop up. You're not lying to the jurors, but you're certainly emphasizing the strengths or impeaching the credibility of a witness in the case to the point that they know that it's important to you and you want them to remember it. And if you keep repeating that, of course, your theme and your theory has to be repeated and repeated. And then lo and behold, sometimes the state gives you something you didn't expect. It even makes your case stronger. And as far as putting him on the stand, that decision won't be made probably before the defense even finishes their case. They're going to want to wait and see how their experts do. They want to see how they do on cross-examination. And then they're going to have a heart-to-heart with that client. They're probably going to ask for a break, and they'll probably want to talk to him and go over the pros and cons because it is a very difficult decision. He has zero credibility. The only reason he's going to go up there, it's like a negative impact. He could screw everything they've done with one answer, and by the way he answers questions. Or he can give an answer that they think is so important they need, but then he's subject to cross-examination.
And Tim, what would you ask him on you're the defense, and he goes up there? How many questions are you at? First of all, is he the last witness?
No.
Okay.
Because the possibility of him screwing up, you have to have someone come in and make them forget about his screw up. And then if he does well, you might not even call that other witness. But no, I don't usually have the defendant go last. I would usually have someone else that's strong for us.
You guys are getting a free master class in putting on the case here. But Tim, how many questions do you? He basically has to go up there to just explain away his false alibi because he obviously lied about not being at the kennels. Do you just ask him one question about that and then rest your case? Or rest?
You can't put him on the stand and ask him one question.
Okay.
The juror's going to see right through that. Everybody in the courtroom will laugh. And it doesn't prevent the prosecution from cross-examining him on all kinds of things. So they probably got an area they want to focus on, the timeline, and maybe he has an answer, and they're hoping they'll give it, and the state won't have enough time to go investigate it and prove on rebuttal that it's wrong, where those clothes went, the timeline. But that's a hard decision in a murder trial. I mean, it really is.
Jack,
as a lawyer for a defendant, it's even harder.
Jack, if you're the state and suddenly Alex Murdaugh appears on the stand, what are you doing to prepare for your cross?
Well, I mean, the way I prepare, and I think any skilled or seasoned trial lawyer is going to prepare, is everything that the defendant said, you want to be able to go ahead and cross them together and see where they meet, what is consistent, what's inconsistent, and go through all of those. I mean, I love to have several different statements when I'm cross-examining someone so that I can point out what they have been consistent with and what they have not been consistent with. Also to point out what's been inconsistent with other witnesses and what's inconsistent with the physical evidence in a case. And I think there's a load of things that they can go through in cross-examination in this case. Certainly they can attack the timeline, but I think that they're prepared to go ahead and attack a lot of other aspects of the defense case and a lot of different things that the defense has raised in this case. These guys on the state side are skilled in their experience as well. But it's a tough decision to go ahead and put a defendant up. Probably the hardest decision you have to make in a criminal case.
Jack, do you think this trial ends next week in week 5? You do?
I do.
Tim, you also?
I think it does because I think, unlike the prosecution, the defense wants to get their points in and get out. They're not going to belabor it. They're not going to take a chance of that witness crossing up and say something that hurts their case. So they're going to have their questions focused and get out.
Angenette, so Judge Clifton Newman is, the silent star of all this. He's a man of few words, but is definitely moving things along very well here. When initially talk of this roadside shooting came up, Judge Newman said it was a bridge too far. And then the minute the defense, Jim Griffin specifically, mentioned Curtis' cousin Eddie Smith, Judge Newman stepped in and said, you've now crossed that bridge and allowed the testimony. And they tried to get it. They objected to it again, essentially, during testimony Thursday. It was a no-go. Were you surprised that the defense made this error? And I put that in quotes because some people have said maybe Dick Harpootlian intentionally did this. But what was your thought?
Well, when it first happened, I thought, this couldn't have been a mistake. I thought maybe they wanted to try to force the state to call cousin Eddie. Well, they had already said they weren't probably going to do that. They could get this done through a SLED agent when they were having the argument about it, and when the judge said it's a bridge too far. So when Jim Griffin brought it up, I thought to myself, wow. I mean, he obviously asked that question on purpose. I thought personally, from covering these cases, that he opened the door to that by bringing up, drugs and cousin Eddie and all of this stuff with Agent Owen. So I thought maybe it was strategic on their part, but then they argued against it on Thursday morning, and I was a little shocked. So, I don't know if it was a mistake or not. I don't know why he would have brought it up and thought that they couldn't go there. So I don't know.
Jack, any chance your old pal did this on purpose, intentionally? And then to Angenette's point, why would they argue against it once again Thursday morning if that was the case?
Well, I mean, I know that when lawyers are cross-examining witnesses, they try to push the parameters and keep going and pushing it out further and further and further. as far as getting questions in and getting answers. Sometimes you take take one extra step, and that's devastating, and that does open the door. These are two very skilled lawyers, very skilled cross examiners, Jim and Dick. So it's possible that they were really wanting to go ahead and get Eddie up there, and I know they're prepared for him. It does add another motive, possibly in this case, drug dealers and debt and things of that nature that could have offered an explanation as to who killed Maggie and her son. But on the other hand, I'm not sure that they would have gone that route, but I just don't know. I don't know if that was something in their mind or not.
Tim, do you think that cousin Eddie takes a stand? We don't know yet, right?
I don't think they'll call him. I think that the defense purposely did do it. And I think they also have to come back. Now, remember, they're in the appellate court also. So they had to come back and object. And it'll be an invited error, but at least it's an appellate issue that they objected, again, asking the judge not to let it in or limit it. It happens. You're in the middle of a trial. It's heated. It's a long trial. Sometimes you ask that question and you regret asking it. But you had to know that there's some evidence that's helpful for them with cousin Eddie. Like Jack said, the motive, maybe a drug dealer killed his family because he owed him all this money. And they got this whole thing about $50,000 a week in drug use, which is absolutely crazy. And the fact that a drug dealer takes checks, I've never heard of a drug dealer taking a check. In 37 years of practice, I've never seen a drug dealer take a check.
Can I add to that?
Yes, please.
There's a whole nother dimension to that, though, too, because there are money laundering charges, and I still am not clear on that, involving, Alex Murdaugh and cousin Eddie. I mean, cousin Eddie's charged with, they're facing these conspiracy narcotics charges with the oxycodone, but then cousin Eddie's charged with money laundering. So I guess they're thinking he was laundering money for Alex Murdaugh. I just don't know why. So I don't know if anybody has any insight into that, but I just thought I would bring that up. There's that whole other aspect of it.
And that has come up quite a bit. People are tweeting. We'll get to some of these comments saying there's something bigger going on here. This isn't even a story just about a man who murdered his wife and son, but there's, a whole other story happening here. Jack, when I heard that $50,000 in drugs, I think it was monthly, correct? I said to myself, oh my God, this guy's a dead man, Alex Murdaugh. But then I'm not savvy like you guys, because as Tim just said, you're spending that kind of money. Maybe it was a cartel. Now things get murky. Maybe it was a drug dealer. Kim Varner, a defense attorney, said this has the makings of a cartel hit. So something that appears to be very damning for Alex Murdaugh, this $50,000 figure, could in fact help the defense, couldn't it?
Well, it could. I mean, that was one of the things that I think I said, that by bringing Eddie into this thing, you are offering a different possibility or another possibility about why somebody may have killed these folks for money, revenge, something of that nature. But, you have to you just can't leave it out there and just throw it out there without offering some corroborating information. There are rumors, and I don't know what could be put into evidence. I'm not sure. But there are rumors that there was a cartel type of operation going on down in that area. And maybe we're still going to hear about some of that. I don't know.
It's even more wild. Taking a half step back, Jack, to you. I don't want to underscore this too much because you're young and spry, but you've been practicing since '73. Have you ever seen, and I think I asked you this last time, something like this or close to it in the great state of South Carolina or in the other 49 states for that matter?
Well, we've had a couple of cases that have reached this kind of level of publicity, of interest, but it doesn't happen very often. These cases come along, once in a blue moon, really, to use an old phrase. So it's not something you'd regularly see, but every state has had their cases that have hit the limelight and have drawn that kind of interest and that kind of emotion. And this is one of them. But I would say it's it's the exception rather than the rule.
And I'm going to pivot over to some STS Nation questions and comments, so we have some breathing room with them today. First one, and Jack, this is going to go right back to you from user with a gazillion letters. Thank you. Great guests as always. The hardest thing for me is to watch someone who I feel is guilty work the system yet again. That someone can commit a crime, but instead of being held accountable, the trial becomes a shell game. It's so disgusting to me. And I grew up with a lawyer, but my grandpa had integrity, and his aim was always the truth and justice. How do you respond to that, Jack?
Well, I mean, my response is this: defense lawyers have an obligation to go ahead and defend their client to the best of their ability and being zealous in that defense. Why? Because we are trying to defend the Constitution. We're trying to require the state to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Because we're defending murder cases doesn't mean we believe in murder, but we do believe in the system that requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And the lawyer doesn't make that decision. The jury makes that decision. So the lawyer is only providing the vehicle and the means to go ahead and reach a fair verdict. And as long as the lawyer doesn't do anything unethical or illegal, then that's the way the system is supposed to work. And if the system works for somebody like Alex Murdaugh, if he's guilty and he's found not guilty, then that means that the system is going to be there inviolate for anybody else who is facing a jury and is innocent. So you just hope that the jury system stays intact and holds the government to that standard and proof.
Well said. The next one comes from Claire Heasley, and this goes to you, Tim. The big key, I think, is that if there were two shooters, how, in all caps, did they know Maggie and Paul were going to be at those sheds when it was Alec who made two individual calls to his wife and son separately, asking them to come home from two separate locations? Either, I don't understand this last sentence. Either way, that's what they're saying. Either way, Alec is directly involved. If you're the defense, that's a tough thing to get around, right?
That's a great point, because Maggie's sister testified that Alec asked her to come. She didn't want to go. And I think Maggie even said, he's up to something.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't want to go there. She went there. So it wasn't like you had people surveying these people, knew they would be there, and decided to hit them at the time. That's another timeline problem for them, is that these two people were just by coincidence there at that location. Maggie should have never been there, didn't want to go there, didn't like going there at that point in their marriage. And Alec is the one that asked her to come. And the defense said, well, you should go because, his dad's in the hospital and he's asking for you. Still, people are saying Alec is a very thoughtful, controlling, really bright guy, and it wouldn't be beyond him to get him there and do this. He didn't know about Snapchat. He didn't know that kid was doing that video. He didn't know his voice was going to be on there. Technology is great for some things, but sometimes it can be a killer.
Tim, quick follow-up nerdy law question for you. In the same vein as jurors not being able to take notes, obviously, as an attorney, you can. How do lawyers, state and defense, kind of collate their closing arguments? Are you writing down certain things the whole way through and asterisks? Don't forget to mention this. Don't forget to mention that. Is there a folder called closing arguments that you put certain things in? How do you handle that?
Well, there's a saying, if the facts are against you, you argue the law. If the law is against you, you argue the facts. But you obviously, during the trial, good points. Usually I have like different colored pens. I have a red, I have a marker, a green, and a yellow, something that's key. I keep all my notepads in order so I can go through every witness and prepare it. Hopefully you have enough time to do that. Hopefully you have other people on your team that are doing that on a daily, nightly basis for each witness, and then comparing it to other witnesses. So when you get up in closing, you have what you need. And in my last trial, we had like 1,200 exhibits introduced with the FBI, and I had projector, and we were able to show a statement, ask the witness a question, And then in closing, we were able to use those statements, put them up there. And it was very effective because jurors love it when they can see something. Did you tell them this? No. Then you play it. Very effective, especially people who haven't taken notes.
When I grow up, I need to be like Tim. I've been writing a book about my mom and had an absolute heart attack today because I'm like missing a bunch of files because one of my computer. I don't want to bore you guys, but my point is I'm not very well organized, and now I have to bring my IT director, aka my wife, into things. So, next comment from Elf 1845, and Angenette, this is for you.
Okay.
They write because we had two guests on, both defense attorneys last night, who basically bashed with arguments, I might add, the job the state has done. And this person writes, SLED has botched this case. Prosecution has not been focused. Flight of ideas just disjointed. No flow to presentation of witnesses. Cross-examination yesterday did timeline for them beautifully, point by point. Anyway, they're not happy about the case the state has put on. I've heard people say that they're not really listening. They're not following up with witness testimony. Have you seen that? Do you feel this way at all?
I do feel like the presentation has been very disjointed. And I think part of the reason it has been that way is because of we had the, so-called trial within the trial, the hearing outside the presence of the jury. That kind of interrupted the flow of things. Then they get to call these witnesses, the financial motive witnesses. They sprinkle them throughout. So I feel like there's been no flow. And if there was a flow in the beginning, it certainly was interrupted by all of this. And I think they could have helped themselves a little bit with that, like just getting things scheduled a little more tightly. I know the lead SLED agent, his mom passed away this week. So that had been out there. So I'm sure that kind of interrupted things as well. But I do think it's been disjointed in many ways. And I think that they've hopped around so much. They haven't taken advantage of visual aids. I don't love PowerPoint. Like if you asked me to put a PowerPoint together, I would just not want to do it. But I think there are times when those things are helpful, especially when a jury can't take notes. So I think the presentation has been lacking in some ways. I thought Creighton Waters today did a good job when he's like laying on the ground with Kinsey. So I thought that was good, because you're actually showing the people something. But is it too late? I don't know. I think the defense does have some hurdles to get over with the timeline in the kennel video and stuff like that. But I think that there were a lot of unforced errors in the presentation of this case. And I think to Tim's point, I've seen prosecutors do this before where they get so in the weeds, they're so into it and they know every little nitty gritty thing. And you just got to I live in the weeds with these cases, but you have to pull yourself out of the weeds a little bit and do a little more big picture kind of thing. Just my opinion.
And so these are a couple of back-to-back comments just to show you, and these people could be jurors. I mean, obviously not for this case, but I mean, theoretically. Christina O'Brien writes, this whole case is so circumstantial. If the defense rested today, I have to say that the state has not proven without a reasonable doubt. There are a lot of holes in the state's theory and case, followed by one windy old bird who writes, this trial is the most confusing presentation ever, and jurors cannot take notes. Jurors' hands will be tied to whatever people can make out of this mess, followed by Stoos 9803. Prosecution is ridiculously bad, disjointed, not concise or clear. They're throwing everything at the wall and seeing if anything sticks. And then, Tim, to you, April Hollingsworth rounds this out. If he gets convicted, it would be from the video cell phone timeline and his comment to his mom's caregiver. Oh, and telling people he wasn't at the kennels. Forget the other stuff. Again, should the state have gone up there and say, basically just exactly that? I mean, should their arguments have been way, way shorter, concise, and to the point, as she suggests?
I think the state had a lot of pressure on them. And I think these lawyers had a lot of pressure because this was a high profile case and this was a family and it was outrageous what happened to these people, that they probably felt they had to do everything, because if they didn't, then they would have been seen as not doing enough and the guy got away with murder. I don't know if they did a focus group. I don't know if the state attorney does that up there, Jack. We do focus groups, and you'll be amazed at what jurors pick up on, what they get from a witness and what they get from a case. I would have done a focus group, especially if these lawyers. You could do a case and figure out what sells to a jury. They should have kept it straight and narrow. Focus on the big things and keep ramping those up. Doesn't fit the timeline. He was here. He said this. He said this, and there was no possibility that someone else could have come in, committed these crimes, and got away. And then take his own words. He lied. He didn't have to give a statement. He said 3 times, "I wasn't there. I wasn't there." There's he is talking on the tape.
Jack, Wendy Payne writes, 2-bit investigation equals corruption equals Alec gets off. The power of the Murdaugh family still has they still have in that area is staggering. Need I say more? Bigger picture, is there a problem in that part of South Carolina with corruption, nepotism, one family wielding too much power?
Well, I mean, I think in the old days, and I hate to use that quote, but in the old days, I mean, there were individuals who wielded a lot of power in certain judicial circuits. They were also, the state senators. They were the solicitors. Excuse me. But I think that kind of thing today is in the past. There's no one person anymore that controls a county. Our whole system has developed way beyond that. But I would say 50, 60 years ago, there were very powerful individuals in these areas, like in Hampton County, Colleton County, and some of the counties in that area, that were very powerful, and they had dynasties. But I think that, and the power that they had, I just don't think is as much as it used to be. So, to whatever extent, the comments that have been made here, I think, are really good for the defense closing argument. Somebody ought to be writing them all down.
It's kind of ironic. Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, they're sort of in a weird way the great equalizer. You can't get away with anything because everyone's got a camera on their phone and they're putting it out there. And it might be Alex Murdaugh's undoing, something like Snapchat, which is kind of crazy. To you, Angenette, from Miscellaneous, the prosecution is fine. By the way, when my mother says to me, "You're doing fine," I scream at her. I hate that word.
Me too. When my mom would say, "Oh, it's fine," I just, fingernails on a chalkboard. It means like it's okay, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm glad we have that in common.
Yeah.
So Miscellaneous writes, he lied about going to the kennel. He hid his clothes and shirt, lied about what time he was there, told the housekeeper to lie about his clothes, claimed he checked their pulse but had no brain matter and only sprinkles of blood on his T-shirt. We saw him lie in the interview again.
But he didn't have any blood on the T-shirt, so.
Yeah. Does the state need to be much more simplified in your estimation, going into closing arguments, and just hit these points and say, "Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," and just boom?
Yeah, I mean, if it's fine and it's that simple, but I mean, is beyond a reasonable doubt fine? I don't think it is. I mean, at least that's not supposed to be the standard. But I think if it's really comes down to it being that simple, that he's on the kennel video that Paul shot, he's wearing different clothes on the Snapchat video, and that he said, "Yeah, I wasn't down there 3 times," then do keep it simple, keep it simple, stupid, the old saying. So I don't know. I'm not a prosecutor. I'm not sitting there with the attorney general breathing down my neck every day, sitting at counsel table. I don't know if you guys have noticed that, but the elected attorney general has been there each day sitting at the table. But I think they've gotten I think they have made it more complicated. And I'm not even sure they should have brought this roadside shooting thing in just because they were allowed to. I'm just like, I mean, come on. I mean, does it really matter? Like, if that's what you need to win, then I don't know.
Yeah, I think it derails the focus for sure. At first, I thought it was a great win for the state, and then, You have
I mean,
something-
I enjoyed hearing it, but I'm not a juror. I'm reporting on it. It's a totally different thing.
100%. Diane writes, and Tim, I'm going to toss this to you. I love these. The short comments always get me because they're very simple, but they're poignant. And she writes, all caps, wait a minute. Those guns were family guns that killed them. Explain that. Tim, again, should the state say that in their closing arguments? Because if someone's coming to kill them and it's cartel hit, they're probably coming with their own guns, right?
They would bring their own guns, and I doubt they would use a shotgun if it was. Cartels don't usually use shotguns. They probably bring an AR-15 or 9 millimeters. Yeah, cartel's not going to use a shotgun, and not a family shotgun. That's a good point.
Excellent point. Jack, Shellos 8, and then we'll wrap it up in a moment. My opinion I feel like this person is speaking for a lot of us. My opinion changes day by day. I really don't feel that the Attorney General has proven Alex's guilt, the state. If you're a juror waffling between guilty and not guilty at the time of deliberations, you must go with not guilty. I did hear a legal expert say they cannot recall a time this far along in a trial where they couldn't get a read on the jury, get a sense of which way they might go. Do you feel that way at all?
Well, every time I try to read a jury, I'm wrong. So I don't do that anymore. I've had juries that I thought were going to go clearly for conviction and come back with a not guilty, and I've had it the other way as well.
Mm.
Very difficult to read a jury, and they're pretty good at hiding what their thoughts are. The one thing I would say is this, and I think this has been commented on a number of different times. I really have not bought into the state's theory that the financial crimes were the motive in this case, or that the fact that he was going to deflect from his financial crimes and the theft of money from his friends and his law firm by going ahead and killing his wife and his son. I've never bought into that. It doesn't make any sense. And a verdict has to make some sense in addition to analyzing the law and reasonable doubt. And if there's a reasonable doubt, you must find somebody not guilty. But it doesn't, there's no nexus between what they're saying about the murder and the financial crime. And in what way would that deflect to create sympathy for an individual to the point where you would acquit him of murder? I don't buy into that.
And a final comment here from Mary Goff. Alex Murdaugh will be found guilty. She's going on the record. Mark my words, she says. Between the evidence and Alex Murdaugh and his attorney's arrogance, dismissive and condescending to witnesses, he will go down. Angenette, your final thoughts. Angenette, by the way, is a correspondent and host for the Law and Crime Network, covering a lot of big cases like Kyle Rittenhouse and more recently Derek Chauvin, the disgraced Minneapolis police officer. Angenette, you want to give us your prediction? Are we looking at a hung jury, guilty, not guilty?
You know, I could see. I don't think they're going to get a straight not guilty, but I could see a hung jury. But I mean, I feel like a prediction this far in the game, or this, early in the game, and I know it's kind of late in the game for the state, but we haven't seen the defense case yet. Part of me feels like if they're just going to put on all experts, that could be, don't they? I feel like maybe they need some other types of witnesses. Maybe they don't have other types of witnesses, but I don't know. I don't know if I'm willing to say, oh yeah, it's definitely going to be guilty at this point. I could see how some people would say that just based on, we don't know where the clothes are and he was at the kennels. So I could see that possibly, but I don't know.
Tim Jansen spent 5 years as a federal prosecutor. He is now a partner and owner in the firm Jansen and Davis, which bears his name, as you can tell, a very savvy criminal defense attorney. Tim, pull back the curtain. What's going to go on with Dick Harpootlian and his team this weekend as they prepare their case for next week?
I would think they're going to get it pared down, who their best witnesses are, what points they want to make, and then they're going to cut down who they absolutely want to call. They'll have standby people who they may call depending on cross-examination, and they'll probably be prepping. I don't know if they can. I guess they can prep him while he's in jail. prepping him for possibly testifying, and of course, giving him all the advice he can possibly get to make that decision. But I agree with Angenette. I don't think there's going to be a not guilty verdict. I think there's clearly going to be some people who've heard the testimony, seen those pictures, and someone's going to pay for the murder, and they're going to believe that he did it. And they're going to have holdouts who will not vote not guilty. You may end up with a hung jury, though. But if he testifies and does poorly, then that might push it over to a conviction.
And Tim, let's say they decide that he will take the stand. Walk us through that for a minute. Does Dick Harpootlian go over to the jail? He goes and sits with him and says, this is how it's going to go down. This is what I'm going to ask you. This is how I want you to respond. How does that communication go between lawyer and client?
You always prepare your witness to testify, which means there's no surprises. You don't put him up there and just ask him cold questions. Anybody that does that is ineffective, incompetent, and shouldn't be trying cases. You're going to have your questions. He's going to know what you want to get out, what your point you're trying to make. You're going to try to cross-examine him, have another lawyer cross-examine him with all the bad stuff. So he's prepared for bad questions. You're going to prepare him how to respond, to look to the jurors. He's not his credibility is horrible. I don't know how much you can make him more sympathetic, but it may be he just needs to get up there and say, I didn't do it. And this is where I was. I wasn't there. That's not my voice. And he's got to be short and quick. When they start going on, that's when they open. And that's when that prosecutor is just waiting for him to say something that they clearly have a witness or something that can prove he's lying again. But he's got to be prepared. And I can tell you, if he takes the witness stand, those jurors will be on there. They're going to be on there. They're going to be watching that testimony.
When I was 4 years old and probably just out of pull-ups, Jack Swerling was lawyering in the great state of South Carolina already. He had already moved from New York and made his way to being a super lawyer, top 10 in criminal defense, and is also a former partner of Dick Harpootlian. I suppose I'm going to ask you the same question, Jack. And by the way, Jack says he uses his size, a big man, and his voice. I want STS Nation to write in. I want to get Jack to do my voiceover for this podcast. And I will even pay him for his services. I can hear my mother yelling at me, don't ask for stuff, but he does have a great voice. Jack, what is your friend Dick Harpootlian doing this weekend? And will Alex Murdaugh take the stand?
Well, that's the $64,000 question, but I'd like to give you an answer. I know what Dick is going to be doing is he's going to be preparing Alec for testimony. And because, as Tim said, you have to prepare your client because you may have to go one way or the other. And sometimes that decision can't be made until your last witness. So he will be prepared to testify. And Dick has, and I've seen it, he will have somebody cross-examine Alec to see how he does under cross-examination and then help him make an assessment as to whether he should take the witness stand or not. My prediction, he doesn't take the witness stand. I believe it's going to be a hung jury. I don't see 12 people coming back one way or the other unanimously. And so I think we're going to probably end up with a hung jury. I also think there's going to be a couple more surprises in this case that people are not anticipating, either on behalf of the state or the defense. At this point, I cannot see the state resting with where they are. There's got to be something else coming, I believe, anyway.
Do you think that's Cousin Eddie coming, or
it could be? It could be, and I just don't believe them closing the case on this at this level right now. It sort of has wound down, and so there's no excitement, there's no drama at this point. On the other hand, the defense is going to, I think, will come up with some surprises, and that's what's going to happen. I think a jury will come and find it very difficult to be unanimous one way or the other.
And Jack, lastly, if there is a hung jury, will the case be retried, and how soon?
Absolutely, it'll be retried. You got some high-profile people here, a high-profile family. That law firm is a high-profile law firm, and the Murdaughs are a dynasty in that area. So it's going to be tried again.
Within the year, or how long do you think?
Probably within maybe a year, year and a half. Somebody, whether or not Harpootlian and Griffin are the ones that try it again, that's going to be up to them and be up to the Murdaughs. But if it's going to be another set of lawyers, they're going to need some time. But certainly, I can't imagine that he going with anybody other than Dick and Jim Griffin, because they've done a pretty good job as far as I'm concerned.
I love you all. I just don't know if I can handle doing this again in a year, but we'll see. So, final programming note: every Friday, 2:30 p.m., we are live. You get your true crime fill with America's most respected detective, Detective Phil Waters, and every Sunday night live with my lovely mother, Carm, on the case. Until then, love you, America.